I've analyzed the profiles of the 200 best Caitlyn players in the world, so I can now share with you all their secrets. You're going to learn exactly how to maximize your win rate with Caitlyn in solo queue. And by the way, the title of this video is not clickbait. A 70% win rate, or in other words, winning 7 out of 10 games on average, is not only possible, but even expected for an improving player. You see, it is a commonly accepted fact that you win 30% of your games no matter what. Your 4 random teammates in solo queue are sometimes just much stronger than the random players on the enemy team, so your team will carry unless you actively sabotage. But you will also lose 30% of your games no matter how well you play. Your random allies happen to be so much worse than the enemy that there is nothing you can do to compensate, so the enemy gets a well-deserved victory. However, what happens in the other 40% of games is entirely under your control. And if you clutch out these crucial games that could go either way, you will end up with a 70% win rate. The tricky part is, though, that these games are often disguised as auto losses, so people tend to give up when in reality they could still carry. Look at this top laner, for example, dying over and over. Most Caitlyn players would at least mentally throw in the towel here, but not this one. This Caitlyn still finds ways to carry despite all of this, which is also the reason why they have a 70% win rate in Master Elo. However, before we analyze the Caitlyn playstyle that makes this possible, I want to share with you the optimal runes and items for Caitlyn in solo queue so you can copy those right away. I looked at these 200 profiles for a very specific reason. Stat websites can, unfortunately, not tell you everything you need to know. In fact, the numbers you find there are almost useless due to working with flawed datasets. For example, stat websites will show you that Caitlyn would be strong with lethality items and the Keystone First Strike. But when looking at the games in which this strategy actually performs, you will see that it lacks that clutch factor. It will often fail to perform in those 40% of games that could go either way, so it is not what you should play if you want to climb. Instead, your optimal solo queue strategy looks like this. Your best rune page is Fleet Footwork, Presence of Mind, Legend Bloodline and Cutdown, with Absolute Focus and Gathering Storm secondary. Fleet Footwork just makes Caitlyn's already amazing lane phase even more oppressive. The healing is nice for sure, especially since you get the full value when attack a champion and a tower, both of which are easy with Caitlyn's big range, but the movement speed is actually the real winner here. Being able to run in and out of range, which is already superior to the opponent's range, means you are the one who fully dictates when to trade and when not to trade. You essentially force your trading patterns upon the enemy, making the lane phase almost unplayable for them unless they get massive help. And it also means you do not really have to invest too much into lifesteal if you don't want to. The next rune, Presence of Mind, means you will always have your crucial spells up. Caitlyn is surprisingly vulnerable despite her big range when your E is not available. But also at other stages of the game, this rune does quite a bit. In lane, for example, you will always have enough mana to push with your Q, and in mid-game teamfights you will always be able to lay down more traps. However, alternatives such as Overheal or even Triumph do exist, and this more comes down to personal preference. Now, Legend Bloodline is the best choice in the next row. Legend Alacrity is nice too, but this is more like an early game Scoot rune for AD carries who do a lot with auto attacks, and while Caitlyn also does a lot with auto attacks, it's more about individual autos with high burst. Speak of Energizer procs or Caitlyn's headshots. What Legend Bloodline gives you, on the other hand, is more freedom with items. Again, just like Fleet Footwork, in combination with this rune especially, it allows you to skip lifesteal if you need to. Sometimes other items are more important, as you will see. Now in the next row, Cutdown is a no-brainer. Many people autopilot and go coup de grace on any champion in this tree, but Cutdown on Caitlyn is especially synergistic. Not only is Caitlyn relatively safe due to her range and when she has her net up, but also her base HP is really low. This is of course to balance out the fact that it's so difficult for the enemy to reach her, but with Cutdown you actually turn that low base HP into a weapon. Even during the lane phase, this rune will already start dealing damage despite being designed as a late game rune, and in the late game you just shred the enemy frontline like no other. For a similar reason, you also want Absolute Focus and Gathering Storm. Your late game burst damage is super high, and it scales best with attack damage. For other champions like Twitch or Kai'Sa for example, these runes would not be as important because they scale more with attack speed. For Caitlyn though, that's not the case, so these runes are phenomenal. Now your core item build, and this might surprise you, is always Storm Razor first, then Berserker's Greaves and Infinity Edge. Especially after the recent buffs, but even without them, Stormrazor is a phenomenal item on Caitlyn. It 100% synergizes with the playstyle you go for anyway. Improved kiting and huge burst damage on singular auto attacks. The build path is of course also perfect for the early game, and it provides just enough attack speed in combination with Berserker's Greaves that you don't really need to spend any more on this stat and instead can spend more on attack damage. Even without going lethality, full crit plus Stormrazor gives Caitlyn a surprisingly high amount of burst damage. Infinity Edge should be self-explanatory, as your headshots directly scale with crit and critical strike damage modifiers, and your ultimate does so too. Again, big ultimates are more associated with lethality builds, but this is not actually the entire picture. Infinity Edge also is a huge damage boost to this spell. Now Caitlyn's late game build is also fairly streamlined. You always have the items of Rapid Fire Cannon, Lord Dominic's Regards, and Bloodthirster. But the order is really free. You must look at the enemy team and then decide which of these items you need first. Lord Doms and Bloodthirster are especially useful when you keep attacking the enemy frontline, and Rapid Fire Cannon is more viable when the entire enemy team is rather squishy. Okay, so now that you know exactly which items to buy and why, and when, let's go into the analysis. The lane phase is typically the phase in the game where Caitlyn is strongest, and Caitlyn absolutely has to make use of that in this matchup, because Lulu Twitch are absolute monsters in the late game. Caitlyn has to apply pressure early so she can avoid having to deal with them in an ideal case. It won't always be possible. If the game stalls long enough, Twitch Lulu will come online, but the longer you can delay this, the better. And in this game, they even get help from their jungler, which certainly does something. And unfortunately, the play does not go according to plan at all. Generally speaking, diving like this is viable, especially in high elo where people know what they're doing, but tower aggro is so strong, and they didn't really juggle tower aggro correctly. So actually red team gets kills here. This is probably the worst case scenario. Caitlyn didn't do anything wrong, but she followed up on Graves' play, which just went horribly awry. Even worse, Maokai joins the fray as well, so Caitlyn did nothing wrong here. She tried her best to make that play worth, yet in the end it's just a double kill for red team. Literally worst case scenario, but you must not get tilted if you are in a situation like this. Your best shot is to just keep playing the lane phase as if nothing bad had ever happened, getting your farm, and as soon as the enemy appears in lane again, you need to make use of Caitlyn's fantastic auto attack range to still apply pressure. If you go for all-in fights at this point, they might make use of their item advantage, but if you just play to your character's strengths, it should be alright. Twitch's wave clear with his poison isn't the worst thing in the world, but it still doesn't match up against Caitlyn's wave clear all too well. She clears waves much faster, allowing her to now get pressure indirectly via plating gold. It's still a valuable resource, and it's definitely a way to turn this lane into your favor, even if you're not winning fights. However, Graves joins here, fantastic lane gank, and Twitch will go down. Killing Twitch fast was important, by the way, because now Maokai is too late to the party. The fight is already in blue team's favor here, because numbers advantage is everything. 3 blue team members versus 2 red team members, so red team actually has to retreat and Maokai's counter gank does nothing. Even better, Graves will sacrifice his life here, so Caitlyn can keep auto attacking, going for the aggressive flash into the net combo, and the headshot will finish off the Lulu. Getting kills on Caitlyn is crucial here to provide a counterbalance to the kills that Twitch got. Despite all the things that went wrong in this lane, Caitlyn keeps positioning as aggressively as possible. She keeps pushing the wave into the tower, trying to get that plating gold, very crucial win condition, getting ahead via platings and then carrying the game from there. But also with her massive attack range, always threatening Twitch, restricting movement with traps behind the tower, and setting up potential dives for her team. With all of this, Caitlyn applies a lot of indirect pressure. She is not really getting herself in harm's way, but rather creates openings for her allies to follow up. Even if a dive doesn't happen, by the way, you still get an advantage here in the form of either HP or tower platings and potentially even dragons. And in this case here, Maokai gets the engage with the ultimates, but Caitlyn can stay so safe with her net that she can now keep fighting without ever getting engaged on. Her auto attacks deal massive damage, Twitch has a hard time to retaliate when his ultimate is on cooldown, and red team actually has to retreat, despite the fact Twitch still had item advantage. Caitlyn's just drawing so much pressure from the enemy team, demanding so much of their time and their resources, that her allies actually get a lot of breathing room out of the deal as well. This is how you can make even rather bad teammates shine. By just demanding attention from their allies, your allies don't have to worry about the enemy as much and they can play much more freely. The reward for playing a lane phase that clean is the first tower, which is another huge source of gold, allowing you to get your items even faster. And items are everything for AD carries. Yes, lane phase is over for Caitlyn at this point, and people might argue that this would be bad because you're essentially getting not as much time in your strongest phase of the game. But you need to keep in mind Caitlyn cashed in. She got all the platings, she got the full tower, so even though this lane phase was relatively short, she got everything she wanted and can now continue from there. All this gold actually allowed her to get Stormrazor early, and with this burst damage she can bait Anivia into engaging into her EQ combo, finishes her with her ultimate. Beautifully played, making perfect use of the strength she already got. But as you know, Caitlyn's team is behind in gold, the enemy is quite fed, so even a minor mistake like this one where Rakan barely misses his engage will cost them Rakan's life and their mid lane tower. It is a steep mountain to climb, and your job as a Caitlyn player in this position is to just stay safe, not die yourself, so you can keep your farm high, get your items fast, and try to impact the game that way. But it's important to always stay in position to follow up if the engage goes right. Here, Rakan does land the knock-up, which leads to huge damage on the enemy. The combination of Rakan's and Caitlyn's auto-attacks and crowd control leaves Twitch completely exposed, allowing Graves to follow up himself, which leads to an actual good fight for blue team, all because of Caitlyn's willingness to follow up and to stay in position despite her team not performing the best they could. Also, this 1v2 against Fed Maokai is a good example of why fleet footwork is so important. The healing the rune provided in this fight kept Caitlyn alive just barely, forcing Maokai to retreat without getting anything out of the deal himself. Also, you have to keep in mind that Riot have just recently buffed Caitlyn's burst damage scaling with crit, so if you don't go for a lethality build, it doesn't matter, you still deal massive burst when you get these headshots, especially with E and auto headshots with traps and everything. Twitch just melts due to the combination of Stormrazor and Infinity Edge alone. 2 items is all it takes. And this fight is actually quite crucial for blue team in general. Maokai and Jax are kinda overextending. Jax is really feeling himself, he's hyper-fed, he schooled that Gwen like no other, but he is also not invincible. CC chains especially will get the better of him, and Caitlyn has the perfect tool to counter his Zhonya's, well, not Zhonya's Hourglass, his stopwatch in this case. As soon as stopwatch wears out, the trap underneath Jax will trigger, and Jax will die to whatever damage hits him at this point. This is a huge shutdown for blue team, and it takes away a lot of the pressure. But once that massive threat is off the map, Caitlyn takes that as an opportunity to go even more aggressive, to play as upfront as possible, jumping into Anivia's face to pressure her, which does work out. It is a 3 versus 1 and she does not need to worry about Jax flanking, which means she can take that victory even a step further, getting yet another kill for her team. All because she knew exactly when to be proactive and when to be reactive. But Jax is still a major problem. So what do you do if he's on the map, but not greedily overextending? Well, look what Caitlyn does. The key here is to deliberately save your disengage spells for Jax's engage so you can get out of melee range as fast as possible, and second, to crucially stay close to your teammates so you actually have somewhere where you can kite towards. Now all of these are ways in which Caitlyn does try to make her team not lose, but red team is obviously still massively ahead, so they do take this Baron, and you need to keep in mind, of course this can feel frustrating, but giving them Baron is obviously still better than dying and still giving them Baron. So Caitlyn does try to cover her teammates wherever possible, however she does not overextend herself. She stays at a range that is still safe enough. Actually, the enemy make the crucial mistake of re-engaging here rather than just disengaging, regrouping and then pushing with Baron, so this works out way better than it should, but Caitlyn never threw herself in harm's way. This is the most important lesson here. As an AD carry, you're extremely vulnerable, you need to play around your teammates even if those teammates don't look too good. However, it is the only way to make situations like this one possible. Due to red team's greed, Caitlyn's team can finally take that first crucial mid lane tower. Mid lane towers the most important objectives on the map since they cover so much area in terms of vision. And of course, after an enemy mistake you need to punish as hard as possible, take whatever objectives you can to make progress on the map. Of course, we are entering dangerous territory here. Twitch Lulu is a monster in the late game, so Caitlyn stays as far away as she can when Twitch pops out of stealth. She stays behind her teammates so Twitch can never open up on her, and then she punishes with her ultimate and her long range in general. With her smart plays and her tilt-proof attitude, Caitlyn bought her team so much time in fact, that they're now strong enough to take Baron themselves. Red team have made a little too many mistakes, and Caitlyn and her team gave them opportunity to make these mistakes. And just because Twitch is stronger than Caitlyn in the late game, generally speaking, doesn't mean Caitlyn should be underestimated. She's still a crit AD carry with a lot of items, and she's ready to go. That bait was huge, buffering the net so she gets behind the wall just in time, keeping her safe long enough for the team to regroup, baiting Jax into her team's crowd control, and then dealing the finishing blows on the enemy front line. Massive damage from a huge play. Getting the most fed enemy off the map while still having Baron is of course a huge momentum swing for blue team. Red team tries frantically to defend their base, but at this point it's a little too late. Caitlyn and her team can push down the inhibitor and finish before Jax can respawn. If you want to learn more about the lane phase, the most crucial part of Caitlyn's gameplay, then click the link on your screen right there.